Today's daf is Pei Zayin, and we start with the Mishnah on the third line. Shachat velo kisa. We'll soon see that the Gemara derives from a pasuk that the one who shechted the animal, he's the one who's chayiv in kisui. But in this case, for whatever reason, he failed to cover the blood of either a chayyur or an oaf. V'ro acher, but somebody else was there to see it. Chayiv l'chasos. So the onlooker now takes on the chiyuv and substitutes for the shochet. He can't jump the gun and steal the mitzvah, as we'll soon see, but if the shochet himself is not fulfilling the mitzvah, then it now becomes incumbent upon anyone who's aware of the dam. What happens if after he does the kisya dam, then let's say a wind comes along and blows the afar, the earth, off the dam, and that's called kiso v'nizgal. He covered it, but now it's already exposed because, as we said before, the wind blew away the earth. Potter milachasos. He already had fulfilled his obligation on the first time around, and that's it. He doesn't have to. It's not a din in the, shall we call it in brisket terminology, the chefts of the dam has to be covered. You need a maisa kisui. The gavra has to do one maisa of kisui, and with that, he removes his obligation. Then the Mishnah goes on to say kisoa ruach, but let's say he never actually covered the dam himself, but rather the wind blew a gust of dirt onto the blood. In such a case, chayav l'chasos, meaning if the blood becomes revealed again, either by the wind or through some other method, once it's uncovered, then it really has a chiyuv, because as far as the chovos gavra, the ma'isa kisa, he never implemented it. Tana Rabbana, we learned in a brisa. The shafach v'kisa, the juxtaposition of these two words, that the blood came out and he covered it, and he covered it. Misha shafach yichas, the one who caused the blood to go out, meaning the shochet, he's the one who's obligated in kisa. Shachat velo kisa, but if he didn't fulfill that mitzvah and the blood is there on the ground, and somebody is an onlooker, he sees it, as we saw in the Mishnah, he becomes obligated, he steps into the shoes of the shochet and picks up the chiyuv. How do we know this? Shenemar v'omar livnei Yisrael. The fact that the Torah went out of its way in the parasha of Kisei Adam to mention Bnei Yisrael, what it means is that the obligation to cover the blood, in some sense, is incumbent upon all of Klal Yisrael. In what sense does it become incumbent? After all, we just derived from V'shavach v'kisa that only the one who was shochet the animal is chayav in kisui. But the answer is, in event that that person, the shochet, failed to do the kisui, then all of Klal Yisrael pick up the chiyuv, and whoever's most available, first responders, he's got to be azhar l'chol b'nei Yisrael. There's a very similar structure with regard to milah. In event that the father did not circumcise his son, then the chiyuv falls back on all of Klal Yisrael. Tanya idach, we have another derivation from the same pasuk in a brisa. V'shafach v'kisa, v'meshes shafach bo yechasa. What does that mean? So here we have two interpretations. Rashi says, v'meshes shafach means with his hand. In other words, he's got to take the offer in his hand and cover the dam. But the other Rishonim say lav dafka. He doesn't have to do it with his hand. Just shalo yichasenu beregel shalo yu mitzvahs bezuyas. It's very contemptible to use his foot and kick the earth on top of the dam. That's not respectful for the mitzvah. And any other way of covering the dam that's respectable, even if he uses a kli, a utensil, even though he didn't use his hand, that's okay. Tanya Idach, we have another brisa. V'shafach v'kisa. Again, Misha Shafachu Yichasenu, Maisa B'Yechad Sheshachat, and now we get to the famous sugya of Asora Zehuvim Kesef. What's that? Ruvain went ahead and he shechted a chaya or an oaf. V'kodam Chavero and Shimon jumped the gun. V'kisa, and he fulfilled the mitzvah of kisa. V'chivo Rabban Gamliel litin lo Asora Zehuvim. Chazal set up a certain payment for someone who steals a mitzvah from someone else. Like, let's say, for example, if Ruvain comes in to take the baby away from Shimon, Shimon's the father, and Ruvain implements a milah, he has to pay asara zehuvim kesef. There's a whole discussion, by the way, about burial. If, let's say, the obligation of burial falls on one person, if that person defaults, then it falls on everybody else. That's called the mes mitzvah. But let's say somebody else just jumped a gun, does he have to pay asara zehuvim kesef? In the case of Talmud Torah, we have again a sugya in Kiddushin about what happens if Ruvain has a son named Chanoch, and Shimon comes along and he hijacks Chanoch and he teaches him Torah, robbing Ruvain, the father, of his opportunity to teach his son Torah. And the issue is whether or not we have to impose a penalty of asar zehuvim. Now, it's hard to believe that the asar zehuvim that you pay for stealing a mitzvah is now going to give, something back to the person who was obligated. I mean, he lost the mitzvah. We say that schar mitzvah b'hai al maleki. You can't even imagine what the schar is for a mitzvah. So what happens? The asar zehuvim is payment for the schar mitzvah? No. Asar zehuvim is just a penalty, a knas that was imposed on the mazik, so to speak, or the gazlan who stole the mitzvah. And Rav Gamliel, in our case, penalized the mechasa who jumped ahead and did the kisi adam. He penalized him with asara zehuve kesef, dinrei kesef. So that's a penalty, and it's not compensation. Normally in mazik and gazlan we talk about compensation. You stole someone's cow, and the cow is gone now, and it was worth 200, so you pay him 200, and now he could have his cow back, or maybe not that cow, but a different cow. But in our case, there's no quid pro quo here to purchase the schar by paying asar zehuvim. But rather, this is a knas. Now, would this apply in our time? Does Beis Din have the authority to impose a knas? So the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that already in Bavel there was no knasos, because knas only applies when you have a Sanhedrin, and today you don't have it. Now, we have halacha in knas, which fascinating whether it would apply here or not. Itofas lo mafkina mine, which means that if, let's say, Ruvain steals a cow from Shimon, the cow is worth 200. Now Ruvain has to pay 400 because 200 is Keren and another 200 is Knas. That's called Kefel. And now the question is, can the Nigzal, I don't remember if we called him, what name do we call him? Again, Ruvain steals the cow of Shimon, so let's call him Shimon. If Shimon goes ahead and grabs the extra 200, that's called tfisa, whether we take it out of his hands or no. Once he stole that knas of kefel, which is magilo, he really should get it, then we can't take it away from him. The Gemara vacillates about the following question: Schar mitzvah, schar bracha. What is the gazlan paying for? This asar zehuvim. Is that payment for the reward that he stole from the shochet, who would have done kisi adam and fulfilled that mitzvah? Or is he penalized and he's paying for the bracha because now Ruvain, the shochet, cannot make a bracha on the Kisei Adam because somebody went ahead, we'll call him Shimon, and he grabbed the mitzvah and he already did the Kisei Adam. So the Gemara asks, Lamai nafka. I mean, after all, in this particular case, whether you call it schar mitzvah or call it schar bracha, that's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It makes no difference. He's got to pay asar zuvim kesef, whether or not that's a ke'ilu, compensation for the schar mitzvah or compensation for the stolen bracha. That's irrelevant. However, nafkamina lebirkas hamazon. What do we do in the case of birkas hamazon, where somebody replaced the person who's obligated in birkas hamazon and went ahead and was mevarech birkas hamazon? Now, this is a little bit difficult for us to understand. I mean, how could you steal birkas hamazon? You have no shaychus to birkas hamazon. But back in the day, they had what's called a zimun, but not the way we do zimun. They did a zimun in a chabura, and they had a group that ate together. One person would recite birkas hamazon out loud. The others listened and responded with amen. Now, if, let's say, the host got the right to be mevarach birkas hamazon, now somebody just jumped ahead and preempted him and made the bracha. So now we're going to say that even for the theft of a bracha, you have to pay asar zehuvim. And therefore, iyamrit schar mitzvah, if you're going to tell me that the one who stole the mitzvah of Kisei Adam is paying asar zehuvim to, again, in inverted commas, to ki'ilu compensate for the mitzvah itself, then the answer is, if he's compensating him for one mitzvah, we're not going to impose upon him a second penalty to compensate him for stealing a second mitzvah, meaning the bracha. So therefore, one payment of asar zehuve kesef would be zav would be sufficient. We're not going to tell him, well, you know what? I want you to go ahead and pay a second round of asar zehuvim. That we don't say. So that's called schar mitzvah. Schar mitzvah means for this particular mitzvah, you get payment from the gazlan of asar zehuvim kesef. And therefore, the same thing should apply as far as the bracha is concerned. But iyamrit schar bracha, if you're going to tell me that the reason why you have to compensate the person when you stole the mitzvah of Kisei Adam is because he stole his bracha, is havyon arboim. Wow. The Gemara now holds that since there are 4 brachos that make up birkas hamazon, and somebody stole that bracha from you, then he's got to pay for stealing 4 different brachos. Each one is going to generate a chiyuv of asar zehuvim. You multiply it by 4 and you get 40 zehuvim kesef. It's an awful sum of money. So once again, just to summarize the Gemara's vacillation here, whether or not in the case where you stole birkas hamazon, we look at it as schar from the perspective of schar mitzvah or from the perspective of schar bracha. If it's schar mitzvah, there's one unified element of a mitzvah of birkas hamazon, pei masar zehuvim. But if we look at each bracha individually, because we're going to derive from the case of Kisei Adam that you have to pay for the bracha that you stole from the shochet who would have recited had he been left alone to implement the Kisei Adam. So the Gemara says, Toshma, let's see if we could derive it from a certain how should I say, confrontation with a tztuki, a salusi. The Omer hu tztuki l'Rebbe. Now the tztukim used to come up with questions, sharp questions, to ask the Rebbeim. This at the time of the Tanoim of Rebbe. And they weren't looking for answers, these tztukim. They were just looking up to show up the rabbis. Mi sheyotzar harim lo bara ruach, mi shebara ruach lo yotzar harim. I'm going to come to the conclusion that there are many creators here. In the fancy language of the philosophical world, it's called Gnosticism. You add a G, but you don't pronounce the G. A Gnostic. And a Gnostic is a person who believes that there are many gods. It's kind of like someone who looks up at the sky and he sees powers in the sky, and he thinks that each power would create something else. So again, I don't want to use these words but you'll understand I don't mean anything by saying, if you look up at the mountain and you say, well, the creator of the mountain, and then you look at the winds and you say, who's the creator of the winds? And you go on, and basically what you're saying is there are multiple gods, which is called polytheism. T'chsiv ki hine yotzer harim uborei ruach. In other words, the tztuki quotes scriptures, the devil can quote scriptures, and he's proving from this pasuk that there are different creators, different gods. Because the pasuk says, Ki hine yotzer harim uvarei ruach. It sounds like there are two creators here, one that fashioned the mountains and the other that created the wind. Amalei, so Rebbe responds, Shota, you're an idiot. Feel the safe for the crow. Why do you stop the pasuk at the beginning and you don't read the entire pasuk? The pasuk goes on to say, Hashem tzvakos shmo. It's only one creator. What I find a little strange here is that the word tzvakot is in plural, but I think it means the worlds, the universes, meaning there's one God, and he is the creator of all these different universes. Amalei. So the tztuki gets back into the rink. He's not willing to throw in the towel. He says to Rebbe, Nekot li zimna tlasi yome, umadrina l'chat yuvta. You have a pasuk, and it's a pasuk at the end of Tanakh in Amos, and that pasuk seems to indicate that there's only one creator. Give me 3 days. I'm going to come back to you in 3 days and rebut your argument. Now, it seems that because of the ongoing confrontation between the tztukim and the prushim, they used to have public debates. Now, if Rebbe allows the tztuki 3 days to come up with a pshat in that pasuk in Amos and reject the proof of Rava that there's one single creator of all of the universe, then the Jewish people will be in trouble. this will give the other religions even more power to not only question the rights of the Jews, but even to question the intelligence of the Jews. Ki avakaboy mivra. Oh, I skipped. I'm sorry. Yosef Rebbe Tlas Tani. So Rebbe was so concerned about whether or not this Stuki was going to come back into the rink with a new argument. And would Rebbe be able to counter that argument? There's so much here at stake. So now, if you look at the word mivra, do you see that word mivra? So the translation of the word mivra is like, for example, I hate to give this example, but a person comes back after burying the dead, they get a sudas havra. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, which is a suda that has to be fed to them by the menachamim. So that same word havra in a different conjugation appears here mivra. Right? Mivra is when you have a suda, like a sudas havra. And here we're talking about mivra, a suda after 3 days of fasting. So Rebbe is breaking his fast after 3 days of fasting. Amrule, they say to him, someone's knocking on the door. Stuki koya above. There's a Stuki standing at the door. Omar, Rebbe responds, Vayitnu bibarusi rosh. And this is a pasuk in Tehillim. So what is this pasuk teaching us? That if this Stuki comes in with a counter argument against my pasuk that I quoted earlier, in which I proved that there's only one creator of the entire universe, then it's like putting gall into my su'ud, into my meal. But there's a happy ending to the story. Amaleh, they told Rebbe that the Stuki at his door is not the same Stuki that confronted him 3 days earlier, but rather Rebbe Mevasa Tovos Anilach Lo Motza Tshuva Oivecha Vehipol Atzmo Minagag V'Beis. That Stuki could not find any counter argument against your argument based on the pasuk in Amos is ironclad, and he was so embarrassed that he climbed up to the roof and threw himself overboard, and he died. Amar lo ritzoncha shetisod etzli. So Rebbe's eating this seuda, and Rebbe is a very wealthy man, so you can imagine the seuda was very beefed up. And he turns to this Stuki and says to him, "Ritzoncha shetisod etzli. Maybe you want to come and join me for this festive meal, because you're the one who notified me that I have nothing to worry about with regard to my enemy Stuki." Hey, this would be a great honor for me, says the Stuki, to eat at the table of Rebbe. It's interesting that the Stukim denied Torah Shebal Peh, but yet they still recognized Rebbe as the Gadol. Right. They finished the meal. Amalo, Rebbe says to this Stuki, Koshel bracha achashot atashot, or arba zuhuvim atanotel. I want to present to you the following choice, the following dilemma. I can offer you to drink from the koshel bracha, meaning drink some of the wine. Now, apparently, drinking from a koshel bracha, I think we're mezalzel in it, but it's really, really important. The other option that Rebbe offers the tztuki is I'm going to pay you, I'm going to make the bracha, I'm going to pay you for each one of the four brachas asar zehuvim sach hakol arboim zehuvim, I'm going to pay you. Omalo, kos shel bracha ani shoseh, I don't want your 40 din zav. I'm going to give up on that. I'm a vater. This is what you call a Heilige Tzuki. First, he notifies Rebbe of the great news that the other Tzuki is out of the picture. He's gone. Now, he takes Rebbe up on the offer to join him for the Suda. And last but not least, he takes Rebbe up on the offer of being part of the benching, being part of the Zimun. Anyway, what's most relevant to us, I mean, there are a lot of details in the story that have to be understood, is that the payment for stealing Birkas HaMazon was 40 zehuvim, 10 for each bracha. And basically what Rebbe was saying to him is that if you're not going to join me for the bracha, which is a hope, that's Rebbe's hope, that he would turn down his offer, then I'm going to give you the value that should be paid for the reward that one receives for 4 brachos of Birkas HaMazon, namely 40 zehuvim. He has here an interesting insight here that if you convert the gold into silver, then it comes to 250 zuzim. And the Gemara says in Ksuvas that you can support an entire family on 200 zuzim. And you could buy a goat for 2 zuzim. So imagine, what kind of money is 10 gold coins, it's 250 zuzim. Now, if you're going to pay him for stealing Birkas HaMazon 40 times, then 40 times 250 zuzim. Wow, I can't even calculate that. That's astronomical. I mean, if the culture or the economic strata was such that with 200 zuz you could support a family for a year, imagine taking 250 and multiplying it by 40. That's an awesome sum of money. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Adayin yeshno li'osa mishpacha bein gidolei romin. That family from that Stuki that wanted to be part of the Birkas HaMazon, and he gave up on 40 dinrei zav, that family still rules, the descendants of that family still rule in Rome. Bekornos Mishpachas Bar Luyanus. Now, I don't know if there's any significance to the name Luyanus, which means the son of a lion, but maybe he's called a lion, A, because he rose to prominence and fame in Rome, but B, because he was so elegant about wanting to be part of the bench. Kisov in his gala, the Mishnah says that if it got uncovered, so he fulfilled his chovas gavra on the first round, and that's it. Omar le Rav Acha, Breda Rav Lorah. Maishno mea shavas aveda di Omar, di Omar, Hoshev, afilu mea pa'amim. Why is it that in Hashavas Aveda, if the Aveda gets misplaced or what have you, you have to replace it and on and on and on going? But here you're telling me that if if the wind covered the blood, then you put it. Even though it became uncovered. Amalei, Rav Ashi says, your analogy is not sharp. Why? Hasam lo ksiv miuta, hacha ksiv miuta v'kisahu. So with regard to Hashavas Aveda, you don't have any mute. Adarab, it says Hashiv Teshire, which is a reboot. But here, with regard to Kisi Adam, we have a mute. Now, what's the mute? It says Vikisahu, meaning he who shechted the animal has to cover the blood. Mishnah says he saw a ruach, and he never did the Maaseh Gavra of Kisui, and therefore it becomes uncovered. You have to cover it. Omar Rabbi Yochanan lo shanu el shechazav in his gala, only because the wind covered it, but then the I don't know exactly how it became uncovered again. Just 1 second. Maybe it was the wind. Or... Avalo chazav in his gala. Potami Now this is very difficult because we said that there's a chovas gavra of a Maaseh Kisui. He never did a Maaseh Kisui. Okay, I understand that as long as it was covered by the wind, the soil covered it, there's no blood around. But now chazav in his gala became uncovered again. So why? Why is he potter in this case? Here's the pshat. He's potter because it's not uncovered, but if it would be chazav in his gala, I'm sorry, if it was lo chazav in his gala, then he's potter. So again, when we say he's potter, means there's no chiyuv because the blood is not exposed. Chazav in his gala, my havi. I don't care, even if, let's say, the wind covered it and then the wind blew and uncovered it. Why should he be chayav? Ha'idchile, we have a principle called yesh dichui b'mitzvahs. So let's say, for example, you have a hadas, and it didn't have any berries on it. Then it grew berries, and the berries were multiple berries. So therefore, the hadas is possible because you have more berries than anofim, and then afterwards, some of those berries fell off. So we say yesh dichui b'mitzvahs, meaning the very moment that the berries were manifold, it passled the hadas, and you can't be choser v'nir, you can't resurrect it from the dead. Omar al-Papa is also saying dichui eitzel mitzvahs, that this particular brisa is of the opinion that ain't dichui eitzel mitzvahs, which means if a certain situation arose where you could not fulfill the mitzvah, but then there was a reversal and now you can fulfill the mitzvah, the fact that at one point you were excluded from the mitzvah doesn't remove the mitzvah. Umaishna mehad sanya shochev v'nivla dam b'karka chayiv lechasos. The blood was nivla; it was absorbed into the ground. And we just finished saying that if the wind blew it and it was covered, you're out of the loop, meaning you're out of the chiyuv, you're exempt. So why don't we apply the same logic in a case where nivla adam? And what's the difference between nivla adam, it was absorbed into the ground, and kisoa ruach? And the Gemara answers, hasam kisherishumo nikar. You know why you're chayav here in this case of nivla? Because it's not a total nivla. So this is fascinating. It seems that if you have dam and it gets absorbed into the ground, but there's still some remnants of the dam on the ground, at least there's a red color, and that red color probably indicates that there's some molecules left to the dam, then you chayv kisi adam. But excuse me, in the case of kisar ruach, there's nothing left to the dam. It's completely obliterated. This leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Pei Zayin, Dam shenis arev b'mayim. Now you have a mixture of dam and mayim. And this is relevant to three different halachas. Number one, can you use that mixture on the mizbeach? Because you need dam in order to generate the kaparas hakarban. Number two, is it considered dam to obligate you in the mitzvah of what? Of kisui adam. And finally, number three, is it one of the seven mashkim that are machshir l'kabel tum? So the Mishnah says the following: Yesh bo maris dam. If there still is an appearance of dam, even if it's mostly water in this mixture, then it's dam. Chayv lechasos, and therefore it could be used on the mizbeach, and it's a machshir l'kabel tuma. Nis'ari b'yayin. So now you might argue that that wine is more powerful than water. No. Rono so ki'ilu mai. We're going to calculate whether or not in this mixture it would have maris dam. But again, the red wine and the dam you can't differentiate, but we know the volume of the wine that got mixed in. Imagine if that volume of wine was water. Nisarev b'dam habehema. Oh, this is an interesting case. You shechted a behema and you shechted a chaya, and the two bloods got mixed together. The chaya generates kisei adam, and the behema does not. Now, the same question could come up if you mix the dam of behema with dam chaya.